Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Bumi, and today we are watching The History of the World's Highest Jump by EmpLemon. Yes, this one was suggested by Banger420 and Kuro2092 over here. And yeah, I actually don't know who has the record for the world's highest jump. I think I'm not sure if they're referring to the one that jumped off a very long pole or if they're referring to the guy that went to like high up in the atmosphere and actually jumped. So yeah, I'm basically going into this blind. I don't know if this is gonna be like a controversy or something, but I guess we'll see. So remember, if you like my reactions, don't forget to leave a like. Let me know your thoughts on the video down in the comment section below, and consider subscribing. We are trying to get to 1,000 subs this year, so hopefully you guys can help me out in that. Also, don't forget to leave your suggestions on what I should check out next. That being said, let's go ahead and watch the video. Ooh, this is a long one, 35 minutes. Okay, so we're going with a guy that jumped off like the edge of space.
What's the highest you've ever jumped? For most of us, that number never exceeds more than a few feet, for the simple reason that jumping off anything higher is terrifying.
Yes,
Basophobia, or the
I
fear
would
of falling,
agree.
is a phobia inherent to humans and many species of animals. In the visual cliff experiment, a vast majority of infants would not cross what appeared to them as a steep drop. The fear of falling appears to be ingrained into the very fiber of our being. It's a sensation that's mutually understood by all, but somewhat difficult to articulate. Statistically speaking, you're about 100 times more likely to die in a car accident than a plane crash. Yet most of us undoubtedly find flying much more terrifying than driving. So why is this the case? Well, for me, the answer lies in the element of control. If you're driving and something goes wrong, you at least feel like you have some input over your own destiny. If something goes wrong on a plane, well,
You're dead.
You're just along for the ride. There's a certainty to falling that's impossible to deny. Once you step over the edge, you become nothing more than an object in motion. Your status, wealth, athleticism, intellect, none of it matters at that point. You have surrendered yourself to the complete mercy of nature and the unbreakable laws that govern it.
Gravity.
In works of fiction, great falls are used to represent finality. Characters are often allowed to cheat death in all sorts of ways, but once you fall into the bottomless pit, it's game over. There's something so absolute about its outcome. To question it would be to question one's own sanity. Only a madman would intentionally step off the platform of unfathomable heights. And yet, in the visual cliff experiment, a few infants would crawl over the cliff completely unfazed. Possibly because they had not yet developed depth perception, but perhaps they grew up to be the very people who override billions of years of evolutionary programming to defy the most fundamental fear of man. This is the story of the world's highest jump.
Okay. This is now getting interesting.
The jump I made here was about a meter, or around 3 feet in height. It's a jump I'm sure most of you would have no problem making as well, but how much higher could you go without hurting yourself in a basic jump like this? In Minecraft, the fall of...
I don't know. I mean, I'm getting pretty old and my knees are not getting any stronger, so and plus as you can see, I'm very fat. Well, yeah, let's just leave it at very fat. So I can't jump off from that high up, and even now I can recall in my younger days where I used to be so afraid. Even if it's just I think a meter, I was okay with a meter. More than 2 meters, yeah, I was just afraid to jump. But as I grew older, as I understand things more, that fear kinda just went away. But still, I'm not stupid enough to jump from high places without any guarantees or protection.
4 blocks or higher will make you take damage. A fall of 23.5 blocks is fatal. In reality, the farthest you can safely fall onto a hard surface is around 10 to 12 feet. Higher than that, and you're likely to walk away with minor injuries. When The Undertaker threw Mick Foley off the top of the cell at King of the Ring 98, Foley plummeted at least 16 feet, dislocating his shoulder in the process. A fall of 20 feet or higher will most likely result in serious injuries, and beyond 100 feet, a fall is considered unsurvivable. There's a common misconception that landing in water will break your fall, but due to surface tension, the only thing you'll be breaking is most of your bones. Landing in water from 100 feet is equivalent to landing on concrete.
Yeah.
Surviving any fall greater than that is exceedingly rare without protective equipment. But for the vast majority of human history, all people had to brace themselves were their arms and legs. Naturally, this meant that any early attempts at the world's highest jump were almost certainly done so involuntarily. The first unsung record holders of this category may have earned their title by accident, by force, or by a failed attempt to end their life. But if someone in prehistoric times did want to make the jump of a lifetime, how far could they possibly fall? Well, in the age before aircraft, all people had to lift themselves was the terrain of the Earth itself. Mount Everest is the tallest point on Earth, but its slope would prematurely stop you long before you reach the bottom. For a continuous, uninterrupted fall, you would have to jump from the world's tallest cliff. For a purely vertical drop, Thor in Canada has a prominence of over 4,100 feet. While highly unlikely, it's theoretically possible that somebody could have jumped from this height. However, in an age before written history, no one can say for sure. For the first recording of anyone jumping off anything, we have to venture closer to the stone mountains of China. As far as we know, this event may have never happened. The only information on it was written by a guy 2,000 years before our time, about a guy 2,000 years before his time. As the legend goes, Emperor Shun escaped the roof of a burning barn by gliding off using his hat to slow his descent. By my estimate, the jump was probably done from the equivalent of a 2-story building, or about 20 feet. It may not sound like much, but this was significant. It's the earliest recorded instance of anyone jumping with intent, rather than falling by mistake. All future jumps would be successors to Shun's 20-foot leap off the burning barn. The ancient Chinese were one of the first civilizations to experiment with aeronautics. As early as 200 BC, acrobats would use bamboo shoots to perform falling stunts at the imperial palace. By 500 AD, kites had become commonplace in Chinese society. Some kite designs had become aerodynamic enough to support the weight of a man. In 559, Yuan Huangtou was one of several prisoners ordered to be executed by gliding off the 108-foot-tall Phoenix Tower. Remarkably, Yuan survived, claiming the unofficial jump record in the process. For his achievement, Yuan was executed anyway.
Oof, I was gonna say if they let him go since he survived.
Despite his grim fate, the record would remain alive for more than 1,000 years. The next great leap in aeronautical innovation came during the Italian Renaissance. Leonardo
by
da
an
Vinci
assassin?
is often credited with the invention of the parachute, but an even earlier concept can be traced back to 1470 from an anonymous manuscript. In 1615, Fausto Veranzio improved upon Leonardo's design, but so far, the parachute only existed in concept. It wasn't until the 18th century that the parachute was brought into reality. Louis Sebastian Lenormand would design and manufacture the first modern parachute. On December 26, 1783, Lenormand would record the first parachute jump in history by jumping from the upper balcony of the Montpellier Observatory. That very same year, just 120 miles away in Annonay, the Montgolfier brothers would develop the first hot air balloon. Within the span of a few months, mankind had not only broken free from Earth's terrain, but found a way to weaken the grip of gravity itself. And it was only a matter of time before someone would use both to make history.
André Garnerin?
On October 22nd, 1797,
I don't know who that is.
André Garnerin became the first person to parachute out of an aircraft. Garnerin rose to 3,200 feet in a hot air balloon, then severed the basket, parachuting back down unharmed. You could argue that this wasn't a true jump, as Garnerin never actually stepped out of the balloon's basket. But based on the illustrations of the basket's design, I would say that it serves little purpose in actually protecting the user, and rather functions as a necessary component of the parachute itself. The important thing is that André Garnerin flew about 500 feet higher than the top of the Burj Khalifa, then severed his only means of flotation, placing full faith in the thin fabric above his head to ensure that he didn't wind up becoming a human crepe. On that day in 1797, André Garnerin became the first skydiver. Just 5 years later, he would set a new all-time record, jumping from a height of 8,000 feet.
Whoa, 8,000.
Garnerin's aerial heroics would inspire a new generation of daredevils who would replicate his death-defying stunt in front of spectators around the world. 19th century parachuters would draw crowds at local carnivals and other venues by dropping out of the sky from altitudes of 2,000 to 5,000 feet. This range is comparable to the cruising altitude of the Fortnite battle bus. And while the stunts looked death-defying, sometimes death would not be defied. In 1837, Robert Cocking earned the grim distinction of becoming the first skydiving
What a
fatality
name.
after his parachute failed at 5,000 feet. Cocking was supposedly
I guess you could say he got a little bit cocky.
attempting to reach the 8,000 foot mark.
I will
that
not
Garnerin
say
had set
sorry for
decades
that
prior,
one.
But the record would not be
Oh.
undone. News of Cocking's death was a sobering reminder to the dangers of falling from thousands of feet in the air, and it extinguished the popularity of parachuting for decades afterwards.
Hey, at
For the
least
rest
it
of the
was probably a
1800s,
quick
there
death.
were no jump attempts on record surpassing Garnerin's 8,000 foot mark. This was mostly due to the limitations of parachutes, as balloons continued to soar throughout the 19th century. Since would-be jumpers were no longer encumbered by the Earth's terrain, the highest theoretical jump was now determined by the balloon altitude record. Even at this time, unmanned balloons could easily rise to tens of thousands of feet, but manned flights now had to deal with the limits of human physiology. Above 15,000 feet, most people will begin to suffer the effects of
Oxygen deprivation.
Most modern-day skydiving excursions will not fly above this altitude for that very reason. Above 26,000 feet is the death zone, the limit beyond which the human body can no longer survive without supplemental oxygen. In 1862, James Glacier and Henry Coxwell became the first people to surpass the death zone. At around 29,000 feet, the pair lost consciousness, with Coxwell barely managing to pull the balloon's valve cord before blacking out. The pair survived when the balloon rapidly descended back to a safe height, but not before setting a new altitude record estimated between 29,000 and 37,000 feet.
That's
By
far.
1887, oxygen tanks became commercially available, allowing ballooners to safely enter the death zone. In 1901, Arthur Burson and Reinhard Suring set an official record of 35,000 feet in a hydrogen balloon, this time remaining conscious to record it. In 1927, Hawthorne Gray became the first person to pass the 40,000 foot mark, but perished after running out of oxygen. In 1931, Auguste Piccard and Paul Kupfer passed the 50,000 foot mark, becoming the first people to enter the stratosphere, as well as the first people to truly witness the curvature of the Earth. In 1933, at the Century of Progress World Fair, Thomas Settle and Chester Fordney would surpass 60,000 feet. By this point, record attempts were quickly approaching the next hard limit in manned balloon flights. As altitude increases, air pressure decreases, as does the boiling point of fluids. At around 60,000 feet, air pressure is low enough where the temperature of your body will exceed the boiling point of water, causing your blood to literally boil. This limit is otherwise known as the Armstrong line, and
that's basically what happens when people are subjected to a vacuum or near vacuum. The liquid in their body starts to boil.
future
And
flights
I
above
do
it
not
would
want
require a
that
pressurized suit.
to happen
In
on me.
1934, the Soviet Union's Osa Vyakhin 1 surpassed the Armstrong line and reached a peak altitude of 72,000 feet before the balloon disintegrated during its descent, killing all 3 crew members.
Damn.
1 year later, in what would be a precursor to the space race, the United States took back the record when Albert Stevens and Orville Anderson
Of course they did.
72,400 feet in the Explorer 2 craft. By this point, balloon flight progression had provided the jump record with massive potential for improvement. But before anyone could attempt a new record, the parachute would have to rise to the occasion. The turn of the 20th century saw 2 tremendous strides in aeronautics, with the invention of the airplane and the airship. The unprecedented boom in air travel renewed interest in the parachute. In 1907, aerial stuntman Charles Broadwick would provide the first major parachute innovation with a static line, which allowed the chute to automatically deploy when jumping out of an aircraft. In 1914, Broadwick's adopted daughter Tiny became the first person to manually deploy a chute while in freefall, eventually leading to the invention of the ripcord. And starting in 1919, Leslie Irvin began manufacturing and distributing the Type A parachute for use as life preservers on airplanes. The Irvin chute would revitalize the pastime of stunt jumping. Just as the balloon jumpers would perform death-defying jumps a century earlier, a new generation of aerial acrobats would wow spectators by jumping from the
Skydivers.
cockpits of their airplanes. This new wave of daredevils became known as the Barnstormers, the most famous of which was a man by the name of Charles Lindbergh. Lindbergh was
I don't
most
know
known for making
him.
the first non-stop transatlantic flight, but buried among his long list of aviation accomplishments was the new record for the world's highest jump. In 1926, Lindbergh used an Irvin chute to bail out of his plane at an altitude of 13,000 feet, finally breaking Gardner's record after more than a century.
Interesting.
1927 saw the first tests of parachutes in military combat, leading to the rise of the paratrooper.
Paratroopers.
In 1943, U.S. Army surgeon Randy Lovelace became the first person on record to jump from the stratosphere. In an Air Force
Whoa.
experiment, Lovelace bailed out of an Army bomber at over 40,000 feet. The force of the parachute knocked him unconscious, and the minus 40-degree temperatures left his hands frostbitten. But Lovelace survived the jump by the skin of his teeth, claiming the record in the process.
Damn,
The
that's a
first ever jump
huge
from the
leap.
stratosphere would be the last with a conventional parachute, at least in the United States. Soviet jumpers Vasily Romanyuk and Nikolai Nikitin would both set higher marks, with Nikitin surpassing 47,000 feet in 1957.
Damn.
While the Russians were fixated on the record itself, the US directed their focus to survival. If pilots were to survive ejecting at very high altitudes, they would need to be equipped with parachutes fit for the edge of space. Randy Lovelace's near-fatal jump would usher in a new era, the dawn of the space jump.
Space jumps. Oh. Watch this become a natural sport a few years later.
Oh!
Do a flip!
Patience of YouTube, it is I, Dr. Spiral, standing here atop this 3-story structure. Now, in my medical opinion, I would say that it's unsafe to fall from this height. I mean, a fall from this height can make your hair fall out. Skydivers can fall faster than 120 miles per hour. In those conditions, your hair won't last long. That's why if you're planning to jump off anything, I recommend using Keeps hair loss prevention first.
Oh, okay.
Keeps is the most affordable medication.
Alright, I'll skip this.
Scientifically speaking,
Okay,
outer
here we
space
go.
doesn't begin until the Kármán line, more than 300,000 feet high. The region between it and the Armstrong line is classified as near space, and as jet planes flew higher, pilots would need a new kind of parachute to safely eject from this range. Following Randy Lovelace's near-fatal jump, the Air Force began testing experimental high-altitude parachutes on dummies. Early designs would force the dummies into an uncontrollable flat spin that would be potentially fatal on human subjects. By
Yeah.
1958, they were ready to test out a new multi-stage design that was intended to stabilize the jumper. Only this time, the test would be conducted on a human being, an unenviable task bestowed upon Captain Joseph Kittinger.
Damn. You would have to have like balls of steel to test out experimental items like that. I mean, if it fails, you die a quick death, so there's that. You probably won't have enough time to process the pain. Most likely, you're probably gonna pass out first, but yeah, this is interesting now.
Kittinger had already proven himself as the Air Force's new favorite guinea pig with his role in Project Manhigh, a 1957 research assignment that saw Kittinger soar 96,000 feet in a balloon,
Damn.
setting a new altitude record in the process.
Yep.
His next assignment would be Project Excelsior, where Kittinger would once again rise to the stratosphere in a balloon, only this time he would have to jump out. On November 16, 1959, Kittinger fastened his pressure suit and boarded Excelsior 1, rising to an altitude of 76,400 feet. At that point, Kittinger unstrapped himself from the gondola and stepped over the edge. Immediately, there was a problem. Kittinger had prematurely deployed his stabilization chute. Just like the test dummies, Kittinger entered an uncontrollable spin. At 120 RPM, Kittinger blacked out nearly 13 miles above the Earth.
Damn.
He regained consciousness just 3,000 feet from the ground. Miraculously, the rest of the chutes functioned according to plan, allowing Joe Kittinger to escape with his life and a new record.
He got lucky.
Despite a near disaster on the first
Whew.
run, Kittinger was determined to prove that the new parachute system could work. Less than a month later, Kittinger would return to the skies with Excelsior 2, jumping from 74,000 feet. This time, the parachutes functioned flawlessly, and although he was just shy of adding to the record, he would get one more chance to make history in the summer of 1960. On the morning of August 16th,
Wow, this is back to back
Kittinger
to
boarded
back.
the gondola for Excelsior 3. Sudden cloud cover almost canceled the mission before it started, but Kittinger launched just 1 minute before the orders to cancel the flight. Soon after, overcast skies would be the least of his concerns. At about 50,000 feet, Kittinger realized that his right glove had failed to pressurize, causing his hand to swell to twice its size.
Ooh.
Despite the potentially catastrophic complication, Kittinger did not inform the ground crew. He knew that if he did, the mission would be immediately aborted. Anticipating that they would never get another chance at a jump, Kittinger bit the bullet and continued to rise. About 1 hour and 40 minutes after launch, Kittinger took the highest step in the world and jumped from the stratosphere for the final time. Kittinger free fell for 4.5 minutes before deploying his main chute. He reached a top speed of 614 miles per hour.
Holy
13 minutes
shit.
and 45 seconds after stepping
That
out
is
of the gondola,
fast.
Joe Kittinger touched down in the New Mexico desert. The ground crew was ecstatic. Not only was Excelsior 3 a resounding success, but Kittinger had just landed from the highest jump in history. So just how high did Joe go?
Almost 100,000 feet? 102, wow. Yeah, nobody's touching that for a while, I think.
102,800 feet. Not only did Joe Kittinger set the all-time jump record, he did so while setting the all-time balloon altitude record, the second highest altitude ever reached by man at that point. After proving that humans could survive exposure to the upper atmosphere, Project Excelsior would open the floodgates for manned space exploration. Soon after, both the US and Soviet Union would send the first astronauts into orbit. But in that moment, Kittinger stood farther from the Earth's surface than all but a single person before him, and then jumped back down. Years later, while serving in Vietnam, Kittinger would be captured as a prisoner of war after his plane was shot down.
Damn.
One has to wonder which moment was more terrifying. Remarkably,
was he alive?
Accomplishing one of the most impressive feats in the history of aviation,
or did they kill him?
Kittinger never actually cared about the record. He took far more satisfaction in completing the mission and validating the effectiveness of the high-altitude parachute. Ironically, the record would go on to define his legacy. Before Joe Kittinger, the jump record only existed as a formality, a sloppy and poorly documented patchwork of events consisting mostly of people who stumbled into the record completely unintentionally. In many ways, Kittinger was no different, but after Excelsior, the record would never be the same. It was the first time that the world's highest jump was documented, broadcasted, and celebrated in the media. Kittinger had effectively made the record tangible, and before long, a new wave of contenders were lining up to break it.
Yep. Once it hits the media, people will want to challenge it.
The challenge for the American record were the Russians. In 1962, Pyotr Dolgov and Yevgeny Andreev were tasked with the Soviet Union's first attempt at a space jump. Andreev successfully jumped from 83,000 feet, setting a new record for the longest free fall. Dolgov jumped from nearly 94,000 feet, but perished after his suit depressurized. Dolgov's death would be covered up for years, but as far as the Soviets were concerned, the mission was a success. Even though Joe Kittinger's record was well documented and precisely measured with state-of-the-art technology, it wasn't verified by the FAI, allowing the Soviets to claim the official record despite falling nearly 20,000 feet short.
What?
For all intents and purposes, Joe Kittinger still held the record, but the Soviets had the validation of a bureaucratic sanctioning body in Switzerland, and they were
bureaucracy.
Not content with the disputed title was a young adventurer from New Jersey, Nicholas Piantanida. The young skydiver had been obsessed with jumping ever since his childhood, where he would nearly fall to his death after jumping from the roof of his apartment with a makeshift parachute made from his bedsheets. By the 60s, Piantanida was determined to bring the undisputed record back to America by making the greatest jump in history. His goal was to break both Kittinger's altitude record and Andreev's freefall record in what would become known as Project Stratojump. But unlike the space jumpers before him, Piantanida didn't have government backing. He had to essentially create his own ragtag aeronautical research program from scratch,
No.
using sponsors, volunteers, and borrowed facilities. While preparing for the jump, Piantanida sought out consultation from Joe Kittinger himself. Kittinger, never a fan of chasing records, refused. He had nearly lost his life performing the feat just a few years prior, and he didn't appreciate Piantanida's cavalier attitude towards the daunting challenge. However, despite his bare-bones resources, Piantanida and the Strato team managed to assemble a working balloon, gondola, and pressure suit. By the autumn of 1965,
Damn.
Nick Piantanida was ready to take to the skies. On October 22nd, Strato Jump 1 lifted off from a field outside of St. Paul, Minnesota. Unfortunately, high wind shear would destroy the balloon at just 16,000 feet, forcing an emergency landing and a second attempt. He would try again on February 2nd, 1966.
The next year.
This time, the balloon had no problem reaching the stratosphere, where it continued rising. Soon, it had soared past Andreev's mark of 80,000, then past Kittinger's mark of 102,000.
Whoa, and he just kept going?
An unprecedented height of 123,500
Damn.
feet. His unyielding hubris was about to pay off. The record was tantalizingly close. All Nick Piantanida had to do
jump.
was step out of the gondola and into the record books.
He couldn't do it. He died?
But there was a problem. The oxygen line tethering Piantanida to the gondola wouldn't
Oof.
detach, and he had no way of severing the connection. After several agonizing minutes at the edge of glory, the ground crew decided to abort the mission. In a turbulent and dangerous descent, a battered Piantanida returned to Earth with the gondola. After the heartbreaking
Damn.
failure, Piantanida would not be deterred. On May 1st, 1966,
He tried again.
he stepped back into the gondola with the goal of once again reaching the 120,000 foot mark.
This is
This
take
time,
3.
he would pay the ultimate price.
And he died.
At 57,000 feet, Nick Piantanida's suit depressurized. The
Oof.
ground crew immediately aborted the mission, but at that point, very little could be done. Piantanida was starved of oxygen for more than 20 minutes, falling
He
into
died.
a coma from which he never recovered. As close as he came to proving everyone wrong, Piantanida's recklessness would ultimately cost him everything. He met a cruelly fitting fate, spending his final moments in the sky, the place he always seemed to belong.
Damn. That
The
sucks.
Strato Jump catastrophe would mark the end of record attempts for a while. Neither of the two world superpowers were interested in balloon jump escapades anymore. They had moved on to new frontiers. Future record holders would have to
Space
independently
race.
direct their own operations. After progressing through millennia of physical barriers to the sky, the newest limitations to the jump record were now cost and ambition. The 60s had
that
quickly
makes sense.
become the age of the astronaut, and
Yep.
the boom in space exploration had taken much of the luster off the once vaunted space jump. It seemed that the only notable jumps of this era happened by complete chance. In 1966, American pilot Bill Weaver would survive a 78,000-foot fall after ejecting from a jet at Mach 3. His life would be spared thanks to the same parachute design that Joe Kittinger had tested just 6 years prior. In 1971, D.B. Cooper became the first
D.B.
and only
Cooper?
person to successfully commit airplane piracy.
Hey, it's
Parachuting an
Lemino.
estimated 10,000 feet with $200,000 in ransom money.
Never
in
found.
1973, Serbian flight attendant Venca Vulovic survived the highest fall on record without a parachute after
Oh.
the plane she was servicing exploded at 33,000 feet. And in 1982,
How
Larry
do
Walters
people
survived
survive those? Without a parachute, you're probably at that altitude. You're probably going terminal velocity at that point. How do you even survive that?
sent to 16,000 feet after tying dozens of weather balloons to a lawn chair. The next attempt at the world's highest jump wouldn't happen until the 90s, with decorated British paratrooper Nish Bruce. Starting in the early 90s, Bruce began training for the eventual Skydive from Space project, where he would make a planned jump from 130,000 feet. The project was partially funded by NASA, who wanted to test the effects of radiation at high altitudes. Despite an encouraging start, the project would abruptly end in 1994 when Bruce suffered an unexpected mental breakdown, stabbing his girlfriend with a pair of scissors. The incident would mark the beginning of Bruce's 8-year-long battle with mental illness, a battle he would eventually lose. In 2002, Nish Bruce would end his life by intentionally jumping from a plane without a parachute. Much like Nick Piantanita, Nish Bruce was someone who seemed to belong to the sky, this time going out on his own terms.
Damn.
After 4 decades of magnificent failure since Project Excelsior, the new millennium would bring a new wave of contenders trying to beat the record. Starting in 2000, Cheryl Stearns would announce her plans to jump from 130,000 feet with the formation of the StratoQuest project. Stearns was the most accomplished female skydiver in history and was prepared to make the ultimate jump in the spring of 2001. Unfortunately, StratoQuest could never quite materialize. After numerous delays and funding issues, the project had fallen defunct by the end of the 2000s.
An Australian man, Rod Milner, announced that next March he plans to skydive from 25 miles above the Earth, reaching speeds over 1,000 miles an hour and breaking the sound barrier.
In 2001, Australian skydiver Rod Milner would make waves in the media by announcing his plan to jump from 130,000 feet and break the sound barrier with his fall. The mission, titled Project Space Jump, had reportedly secured funding from the Australian Defence Force Academy, with plans to launch a year later in March 2002. Well, a year came and went, and no jump was ever attempted.
This never
Following
happened.
the initial media hype, Project Space Jump was never discussed again and eventually forgotten, coming off much more like a publicity stunt than an actual attempt at the record. In 2003, French adventurer Michel Fournier announced Le Grand Saut, during which he planned to jump from 130,000 feet. Fournier made the most progress of anyone in the decade, managing to produce a working balloon, pressure suit, and gondola. Unfortunately, all of Fournier's attempts would be aborted before they could even launch. After spending
Damn.
2 decades and nearly $20 million chasing the record, Michel Fournier couldn't even get off the ground. 2010 would mark the
That's
50-year
sad.
anniversary of Joe Kittinger's record, and after half a century of failure, many began to wonder whether anyone could break it.
Felix
Starting in
Baumgartner?
2010, Red Bull would sponsor the Stratos project and team up with Austrian skydiver Felix Baumgartner to finally top Kittinger's record once and for all. Preparing Felix for the jump would be none other than Joe Kittinger himself.
Oh,
Kittinger's
damn.
blessings seemed to ward off the demons that had plagued all other attempts since he set the record.
What
In
changed?
March
I thought he didn't care too much about the record. What changed? Why has he blessed this one? Red Bull probably gave him a lot of money, didn't they?
2012, Baumgartner would successfully complete the project's first test jump from 71,000 feet. In July, he would complete the second test jump, this time from 96,000 feet. And finally, on October 14, 2012, Felix Baumgartner was ready to make history in a moment streamed live around the world.
Yeah. I saw this happen, but I didn't watch the stream because I didn't care too much, but yeah.
There's the chute. There's the chute. There you can see by the approaching shadow. He's just about there. And he's down.
Almost
After
to
finally having his
130.
record broken, Joe Kittinger never looked happier. After 52 years of frustration, there was finally a new record holder of the world's highest jump. In addition to setting the altitude record, Felix Baumgartner became the first jumper in history to break the sound barrier in his freefall, as well as setting the record for the longest distance in freefall. The
Yep.
YouTube live stream was watched by nearly 10 million viewers, a record that itself would stand for almost 6 years. The new
Almost
record
6
provided a
years.
rare moment of inspiration for a generation who had very little to celebrate in terms of aeronautical achievement. Truly, it was a jump for the ages. After taking half a century to beat Kittinger's mark of 102,000, who knew how long it would take to beat Baumgartner? The record would stand for 2 years.
2 years. A whole
On
2
October
years,
24th,
damn.
2014, computer scientist Alan Eustace would set a new altitude record of 135,889 feet. Eustace worked as the senior VP of engineering at Google and had no prior history of skydiving. or
Got
extreme
beaten by a
stunts.
nerd.
One day he decided that he wanted to pursue the record,
Oh,
so he
man.
assembled a team of collaborators to form StratX. Eustace became the first jumper in history to ascend to the stratosphere without a gondola, relying only on a pressure suit to protect him from the vacuum of near space. The reduction in weight allowed him to soar more than 8,000 feet higher than Baumgartner's mark. In just a single attempt at the record, Alan Eustace went up and got it. That's where the record stands today, but where does it go from here? Well, the record for the highest unmanned balloon flight is 173,900 feet. Lighter weight missions like StratX may approach this altitude, but sooner or later, jumpers will reach another hard limit, the mesosphere. Starting at around 170,000 feet, the air becomes thin enough to force any balloon to burst from the pressure difference. As a result, the mesosphere is the least explored part of the atmosphere, extending too high for balloons and too low for satellites. But what if you were to skip the mesosphere entirely and jump from a satellite? The International Space Station orbits in the thermosphere.
That's probably too far, I would guess. You would probably start feeling the heat of re-entry if you jump from that far. Wait. Yeah, I think that's too far. You probably need a heat shield for that one.
At an average altitude of about 1.3 million feet, nearly 10 times the height of the current record. However, since the ISS is in orbit, it's traveling about 10 times faster than an average bullet.
Yeah,
Re-entering
there's
the
that too.
at that speed will
You will
cause the
burn
human
up.
body to burn up like a meteor. Currently, the best hope for space jumps beyond the stratosphere may be Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two, a suborbital spaceplane capable of surpassing the 300,000 foot mark. Due to the parabolic shape of the flight path, it could be theoretically possible to jump from the peak without extreme exit velocity. Virgin Galactic plans to launch commercial flights on the spaceplane starting this decade, so it's possible that the next great stride in space jumping may be just a few years away. For now, the record stands at just under 136,000 feet. No matter the era, death-defying jumps have never failed to amaze and inspire those who witness them. Space jumping is both a product and an example of our endless thirst for progress. 60 years ago, as Joe Kittinger gazed down at the Earth prior to his record-setting jump, he remarked at the irony of such beauty existing in such deadly conditions. He compared floating through the stratosphere to being enveloped in an ocean of cyanide. Despite literally being on top of the world, Kittinger was overcome with an overwhelming sense of humility. We defy nature by venturing higher and higher, and nature humbles us with its unconquerable vastness. After 4,000 years of trying, we have already managed to jump from unfathomable heights, but we still have so much farther to go. For the future of the world's highest jump, the sky's the limit.
Literally. Wow. Is that it? Okay, yeah. That was a good video. I mean, skydiving is one of the things that I really want to do before I die. At least try and experience it once. Hey, I'll take paragliding. As long as something up high up in the air. Yeah, but skydiving is really one of the things that I really want to try and hopefully get to try. But I don't know. It's pretty expensive, and I don't have any disposable income right now, so that will probably take a while before I get to test it out. But yeah, wait one sec. This damn mosquito. Alright, sorry about that. But yeah, that was interesting though. I am not sure if obviously that record is probably gonna get beaten, and probably by the last suggestion with the Virgin Galactic like suborbital flight. But aside from that, I don't see it, especially with was it the mesosphere that starts popping balloons? So unless if you do it other than a balloon, then I don't think that record is gonna be broken anytime soon, but I guess we'll see. So yeah, that's gonna be it for me today, guys. Link to my Twitter is down in the description below. Go ahead and check it out if you want to, and if you're new here and enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, Let me know your thoughts on the video down in the comment section below and consider subscribing. Again, we are trying to get to 1,000 subs this year, so hopefully you guys can help me out with that. Also, don't forget to leave your suggestions on what I should check out next. That being said, thank you so much for watching and I'll see you all next time. Bye!